I remember I ran into a really tricky situation when I was a PhD student, and in my wisdom, the way I was going to react and handle it would have been terrible. And yet, thankfully, Bob and I were actually out playing tennis, and I started sharing with him about what was going on, and he's like, "No, you're not going to do that. This is actually what you're going to do instead."
When I evaluate discipleship in West, I mean here it's even worse, is that a lot of times we don't focus on that one-on-one, one-on-two, right? So Darin is an example and a model how we should do that in a men's group at our church. You know, you were the one that would meet with some guys one-on-one, and I don't think a lot of people do that, even in a healthy church. And that's something that we need to encourage. I mean, we're working with men, of course, but the ladies to have one or two people who can you walk alongside with, whom
Right.
whom can you be a Barnabas, or who can be your Barnabas? So it's having both, and that's something that we need to really talking openly in our groups to challenge each other to do that.
Hello, everyone. Dennis Allen with the Disciple Dilemma. Two coaches with us today. We're going to talk discipleship. One of those coaches has coached a national collegiate championship soccer team. The other coach has played college basketball and coached a lot of basketball nationally and internationally. Dr. Darin White, who's a professor of business analytics at Samford University, joins us today, along with Dr. Joe Debeljuh from Croatia, Zagreb, Croatia, where Joe also serves as a missionary, and he's got a lot of basketball coaching experience. Together, these two coaches are going to give us some wisdom on what it means to follow Christ from a coach's perspective. Here we go. Well, Professor Darin White, thank you for joining us today on the Disciple Dilemma.
Excited about being here.
And Joe Debeljuh from Zagreb, Croatia. I am so thrilled to have my friend and my mentor from Zagreb joining us on the call too. Joe, thanks for being here and co-hosting.
Thank you. Look forward to it. Glad to be here.
Joe, kind of introduce this thing. How did these two guys that are on my podcast show up together? How'd you guys get to know each other?
Yeah, my family were in Birmingham on a furlough. Of course, attending our local church, our sending church, the Church of Brook Hills. And I attended a men's gathering on Friday night. And I think Darin was on my table. And he was sharing part of his life as we would share after the lesson. And I think after like one or two meetings, Darin asked me, what's my story? Like he would like to get to know me, which was really great because not often people do that. So I went to his office, and of course I learned that he was a soccer player and a coach, and that connected us with, of course, with the Lord. So yeah, the introduction was great, and we met numerous times since then. I brought a few guys that were interested in what we're going to talk about now, what he does.
You're both coaches. What's discipleship look like in the secular side of the house as a coach, and what kind of lessons do you think the Christian church should learn from coaching when it comes to being a disciple maker?
Yeah, I think it was the Apostle Paul who said somewhere in the New Testament, he said, "Follow my example." Right? He literally said that, which sounds almost a little arrogant. You could be like, but that's really, as a coach, that's what you have to realize, is that you are in a visible leadership role, and in all of your players, they're looking at you and they're watching you, and they're watching you 24/7. And so your ability to live that life of faithfulness to Christ in all situations, even in the hard spots when the referee makes a terrible call and you want to cuss them out, you can't do it because they're watching you, right? And so that's, you just have to kind of understand that and realize that you are on stage, and you will have an influence on those players just by the very way you live your life. And so, for example, one area that I'm very passionate about is I believe that as a follower of Christ, we should be excellent at everything we do. We should, if we're gonna put our hand to do something, we need to be the best we can possibly be at it, right? And I have a friend of mine who works at the Arizona Cardinals, and he says, no one wants to follow anyone who is average. Right? I mean, no one does, right? So we're going to have, if you look at Daniel in the Old Testament, it said that the king found him 10 times better. He was an incredible political consultant, great political consultant, right? He was just, he did his job, and he did it really, really well. And so again, as a disciple maker, we need to model excellence in whatever we're doing. And so if that's a coach, I need to come to practice every day really prepared, ready to go. I need to be spot on. I need to model that for my players. And so that's just one example of the sort of thing that you want to model for your players whenever you're in that coaching role.
We have to care for people, I think that's one of the most important thing as a disciple maker, but also as a coach, as I've experienced in my life being a professionally playing basketball in college. I mean, you love those coaches who you knew cared for you, regardless of how you perform. So the love, the care, regardless of your performance, is what makes the greatest impact on people. And obviously, most of the time, we need to be encouraging people, right? But yeah, it's just direct personal relationship and care for people that makes a difference. And I would say that that's what it makes a difference in discipleship by believers in a church, or just walking along somebody within a church or outside as you develop a relationship. You have to show that you care for people, not that they're your project, not that your player is just here for your result, that you really care for this person.
Guys, what do you expect out of your players as a result of watching you? And where I'm going with this is, what do you expect your players to pass on to the other people on the team as a result of you being the coach, disciple maker for the people on your team? What do you want them to pass around, pass on, and infect into the other players on the team?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, for me, we were always very, very concerned about the culture of the team, because you can have all the greatest players in the world, but if you're not connected and unified, and again, just like Joe mentioned, not only is it the coach has to love the players, but the players have to love each other. And the players have to be selfless. The players need to not care who gets the credit, for example, right? If you're going to have a championship team, that's the kind of culture you have to create, right? And so that starts with you, as the coach, as the leader, modeling that. It also comes from you when you see it in practice, you celebrate it. You absolutely celebrate it. And when you see it not happening and you see the opposite happening, you deal with it. You have to have the courage to deal with those sort of situations. But I was so committed to that I even had a coach on my staff, and his title was team unity coach. Like, that was his title. And he was like our team psychologist that literally would, he was always in the ear of the players, listening to kind of what was going on. That was his job. And then he would, and same way when it comes to your captains, when I would select my captains, I always selected captains that modeled those kind of traits, to the rest of the team, that we're going to be selfless, type leaders. And so it's, I believe there was something written about that in the book of Philippians.
What Darin said, the culture is a big word in business world. I'll keep up with NBA. There's a team called Miami Heat, and they're known for culture. Now you got like new up and coming teams who are building the culture of playing defense. That is huge. And we live in a time where, maybe old ways, it's not working. You actually, I grew up in Yugoslavia, you don't tell anything to coach. Or in college, you could never say anything in the 90s to my coach. Like, I couldn't express anything. And I think today we need to be willing to listen, players, because it's all about the relationship, especially in the area that we live now, in the time that we live now, where young people want to express themselves and have an impact. So the culture is huge in anything, of course. And that is in sports as well, because if you have a bad culture, then everything goes south.
Well, not to take this conversation into a Cassandratic sort of doomsday, but let's talk for just a minute about discipleship in the West. What would you two say about a grade for the way Western Christianity does disciple making? What would these two doctors tell me about the students that they see out there in the Christian community or in discipleship?
Because most of our discipleship, it's a men's group, small group, but what Dennis is pushing in his book is for us to be a wingman to somebody, 2, 3 people, and for us to have wingman, somebody who really we can go deep with in our lives and share things so they can speak in our lives and we can speak in their lives because we care for one another on that deep level.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and we don't, in our Western culture, we're so individualistic. We really, really want to keep to ourselves, and we're very much, and so this whole idea of being more of a collectivist kind of an idea where we're sharing with each other. And I mean, I'm very fortunate that I go to a fantastic church of Brook Hills in Birmingham. And I can tell you, we've been there about 5 or 6 years now. And at first it was really weird when all the guys would call me brother. They're like, "Hey, brother," and then I would, and it's still kind of weird to me. Like often I'll be talking to someone in my circle of friends at Brook Hills, and when we get off the phone or whatever, they'll actually say, "Hey, man, I love you," and I'm like, "Whoa, okay." and that's just weird. I mean, it's like, because we don't do that in our culture. Men don't say they love you to each other, right? But the reason I think it works is because there's a real intentionality within the leadership of the group that I'm talking about, where we're really, really stressing discipleship. We want to get to know each other deeply. We want to invest in each other. We're making that a huge priority, because like anything, I mean, in any group, there can be multiple goals, right? It could be a group all about learning the Bible. It could be a group all about, just having a good time, whatever. There's always goals, right? But if we're going to do great discipleship, we got to make that a goal, and then we got to create an environment where that's going to happen. So
what would you two offer up as the typical definition of discipleship in the Western Christian mind? The average guy in the pew, what would they say is discipleship?
Yeah, that's good. My guess would be that your typical person would think discipleship means someone teaching me how to be a better Christian. Like I'm a Christian. I got saved. I did the whole gospel thing and walked the aisle, got saved, got dunked. I'm saved. Now the rest of my life is about learning how to be a better Christian. And I would think that's I know for a lot of my life, that's how I would have defined it. That's not how I would define it now, at all. Now I would define discipleship more as is in fact, again, like literally this morning, we had this conversation of learning, coming alongside other men in this case, and really encouraging each other to feed on the gospel of grace, to learn how to I think Timothy Keller said, do you sing the gospel of grace to yourself? Do you open the Bible and treasure what you've got there? Do you do that? And because that's so critical to, quote, success in the Christian life. And it's not about learning how not to lie or learning, whatever. I mean, those are all part of it, but it's so much more about encouraging each other to focus on what Christ has done for us, and to make that a daily habit within our life, right? And that's to me, that's what discipleship is. That's what effective discipleship is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Darin. Like, most people would think, just going to church, not to do bad things, just maybe grow in Christ, things like that. Yeah. But as far as like definition, my kind of definition is that it's a process or growing personally in Christ, but also helping others to come to know Him, the non-believers, but also those who are believers, help them, lead them closer, or being an example that all of us or both of us who am I walking along with growing in Christ. So helping others to get to know Him, and also those who already know Him growing in Him.
Yeah, because it's a lost skill to know how to take the Word of God and read it in a way where you can see Christ in the Word of God. Take the book of Genesis, take the whatever, but look at the scriptures and read until you find Christ. You see the beauty of Christ and what Christ has done for us, because the entire Bible is one story that points to Christ. And so to me, a huge part of discipleship is coming alongside other men and helping them learn how to do that. Learn the power of what we've got in the Word of God is incredible, but we have a role to play in it. We have to access it, and we've got to get it. I think Alistair Begg said, if you don't preach the gospel of grace to yourself every single day, you're going to go right back into works. You're going to go right back there. And so, a huge part for me of discipleship is that right there. It's teaching each other and encouraging each other in the gospel each and every single day.
So let me throw out a phrase to you two and get you to react on how you think we're doing in the West. Disciples are followers actively pursuing Christ who make disciples who make disciples. If we say that disciples are those who make disciples, how's the West doing with that these days? What thoughts do you guys have there?
Yeah, I mean, probably not doing that well, because sometimes we focus on one or the other, right? Or we focus only to growing Christ in our relationship and in this safe environment, working with other people. And this is huge, right? But where do we get discipleship idea? Well, probably from Great Commission. And in Great Commission, Jesus is speaking to the apostles, and the text presumes that nations do not have the gospel. So therefore, go and make disciples. So the nations don't have the gospel. So the first part is to share the gospel. A lot of people will focus only on that. Okay, I just need to proclaim the gospel. But they don't see the second part. The emphasis is teaching them everything I have commanded you. And so when we think about those two processes, we're probably not doing great. And if somebody would argue that discipleship is only to invest in somebody, then go to Mark 16:15, also consider Great Commission, where Jesus explicitly says, proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. So we need to do both. And I'm not sure how well we do it. I mean, there are statistics, but most people, I would say, they're not focusing on, let's just say, building a relationship with the lost people. A lot of times when I was in Birmingham, I would look at my phone, how many non-believers do I have on my phone? Like literally, I was like, is there anybody here, not a believer,
Yeah, so I would say probably I'd agree. We're not doing. I mean, so much of the focus within the West when it comes to Christianity is in things like the prosperity gospel, for example. That is just booming and growing, and it's all about what God's going to do for me, and it's you get tons and tons and tons of that, or you have a lot of churches that focus on very pragmatic application. How can I be a better Christian? Week after week after week, you're getting a to-do list on how to be a better Christian, over and over and over again. And neither one of those necessarily is going to create someone over time that is going to be the type of person I think we're talking about. So.
And there are pockets of people, sorry to interrupt, but Darin is a prime example of how we can do better, because when I evaluate discipleship in West, I mean, here it's even worse, is that a lot of times we don't focus on that 101, 102, right? So Darin is an example and a model how we should do that in a men's group at our church. You were the one that would meet with some guys 101, and I don't think a lot of people do that, even in a healthy church. And that's something that we need to encourage I mean, we're working with men, of course, but the ladies, to have one or two people who can you walk alongside with, whom can you be a Barnabas, or who can be your Barnabas? So it's having both, and that's something that we need to really talking openly in our groups to challenge each other to do that.
Yeah, and that if you look at, I thought it's interesting when you look. We just went through 1st and 2nd Timothy in our men's group before we're doing what we're doing now, and it was interesting how Paul was very intentional as he was getting near the end of his life to pass on to Timothy this unbelievably important charge, which is the gospel, right? And that's part of it. We have to recognize like what we have is so incredibly it's just amazing what God's given this right, this ability to do this, and the ability then to pass that down to the next generation, faithfully pass that down so they faithfully can teach it and they can faithfully share it to the next generation. It's an incredibly important calling, and I don't know if we really get that. We get the importance of what we're doing when we are actually doing discipleship with younger folks that are younger than us particularly.
Folks, we're talking about discipleship analytics. Dr. Joe Debeljuh and I are interviewing Professor Darin White, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Sports Analytics at Samford. And when we come back, we're going to start unpacking the wingmen in these two guys' lives. Stay with us. Folks, welcome back to the Disciple Dilemma. We are with Professor Darin White, Executive Director for the Center for Sports Analytics at Samford University. Dr. Joe Debeljuh and I are interviewing him, and in a way we're persecuting Joe, which gets the next question. Joe, I would like for you to unpack briefly for us this idea of who discipled you, since the stats suggest 90% of the people in the pews and 80% of the pastors in the pulpits have never actually been discipled. That's some fairly well-researched scholarly data. Joe, have you ever been discipled? Who walked alongside you?
Yeah, I was fortunate to end up not knowing to a Christian university at Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi, similar to Samford University, and all professors are just sharing the gospel left and right. And Dr. Al Chesna, biology professor, walked alongside me some, even when I didn't want to get up at 7. Neil Witherow, my friend, tennis player, he was a believer. Those are the two guys that invested in me during the college. Then after that, my father-in-law spent a year with me. Then executive pastor at Alabaster, at Westwood Baptist, he invested in me. He was a former NBA player. I love basketball, so I came playing pickup games at Chase Mountain Baptist Church. At the time, he was an adult pastor. And then he got me into leading the lessons during the basketball games. He took me to like Westavia High School to share my testimony, things like that. And then you came along, Dennis, for the last, I guess, 7-8 years. You've been impacting my life. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I'm not sure.
So I'll pursue this same question with Darin in just a moment. But Joe, if I ask about this culture question, what did your mentors, the guys who were leading you along, what did they expect out of you personally? And what did they expect out of you in the making of other disciples? What did the culture they were pouring into you feel like to you?
I mean, it depends on the person. Yeah, like the first guys mentored or modeled, evangelism. They expected you to share the gospel, to move it forward. But some also recognized that I guess I was a decent fruit, being an athlete, that they could kind of invest in me more. And so, yeah, it was not necessarily, I wasn't necessarily challenged to go to the mission field, but I was modeled to share the gospel and to make disciples in some ways, So, and what they also did is encourage me in whatever I felt like that the Lord is opening up for my life, a task that He was giving us. Okay, we can call it calling. Sometimes the word calling can be very subjective, but just a task that the Lord has given me. Always encouraged by them to continue this work.
Professor Darin White, tell us a little bit of your story of the people who brought you along as a disciple.
Yeah, well, for me, it really kicked in big time when I was dating my wife. We're literally the first month we were married, we were in Tuscaloosa. I was a grad student down there, and we visited a church, and I met a man named Dr. Bob Brooks, who was a finance professor at the University of Alabama, and he and his wife were about 10 years ahead of us, had exactly the same goals. At that point, they had 5 kids. He was a PhD in finance, the smartest guy I've ever met. I mean, it's unbelievable. He does incredible stuff all over the world in finance, and yet just an incredibly godly guy. And so we were like ticks, man. We stuck to them. We would go over to their house every Sunday after church. I'm sure they got sick of us, but we did it for 4 years. We just lived with the Brooks. And as much as they would take us, we would be there. And so his wife, Ann, really became really huge for my wife, who was a new Christian, and to learn kind of what that all looked like. And then Bob was huge for me as I was walking through the PhD program, learning what it was going to be like. And so, yeah, so they were so massive in terms of sort of shaping our entire worldview of what all that looked like. And so that's kind of where it all started for us, was with the Brooks in Tuscaloosa.
What sort of culture were they pouring into you? In other words, what were the reflexes that you began to manifest as a result of the spiritual development that they were giving you?
Yeah, it was just, when you're, I mean, I was in my 20s and, really passionate for Christ. I mean, we love Jesus and wanted to, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And you run into things in life as you just start living life, you run into things. And so having someone like that who you can trust and you can talk to, and who you can be honest with you about things. Like, for example, I remember I ran into a really tricky situation when I was a PhD student, and in my wisdom, the way I was going to react and handle it would have been terrible. And yet, thankfully, Bob and I were actually out playing tennis, and I started sharing with him about what was going on. And he's like, "No, you're not going to do that. This is actually what you're going to do instead." And he was very firm, and in the end, he was right. And so it's just, there's example after example after example of things like that. Just basic living life. Again, when you're young, you tend to, not only young, even when you're my age, you still do the same thing. We want to, we look at life and situations, and we want to live life based on our wisdom, and we think our wisdom's the best. And yet the Bible says, no, actually, we're terrible at that. And so we need to live by God's wisdom. And it's so helpful when you have a mentor who can help you see your own weaknesses and your own logic and the way you're thinking, if you will. And so that's what the Brooks, did for us, and in many, many ways over the years. So
I would add that just coming from this dysfunctional family in Croatia, just no family. I mean, parents loved me, but I didn't know what families looked like. So when we got married, my father-in-law, Jim Intrican, who modeled also evangelism, but just we were just going over there at the in-laws every Sunday, often, so my father-in-law and my mother-in-law had 9 kids. Like, Darin, you had 7, right? And I ended up with 5, and I had no idea what it meant to be a husband or a father, or had a model at all, despite my parents' love. Just my dad was alcoholic and my mom was mentally ill. So those were like crucial years to learn. And that comes with baggage. The way I grew up comes with baggage, and it still affects you. So having mentors in your life is huge. I mean, even Dennis, he's speaking into my life over the years, when I needed to address things. So, yeah.
I remember when I was a PhD student, you could work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and never get everything done you need to get done. And so I started, and again, I'm a newlywed, new wife, all of this. And I started in my mind thinking, well, I don't have time to go to church. I mean, I don't have time to go to church. I've got to continue, because all of my colleagues, all the other students in the program, they were working they were working on Sundays, and I wasn't. And after about a month or 2 of this, Bob took me aside and said, God says in I think it's in Psalms, he says, he gives to his beloved even in their sleep. And he said, you need to trust God and do the right thing and go to church, be there for your wife. You need to model that for your wife. You need to, on Monday nights, back in the days, remember when we used to do visitation, you'd go drive around, and, so I started doing that, and it was like, I thought I'm going to fail out. I'm going to fail out of the PhD program. That's it.
Okay, guys, you have to untangle a problem for us, and I told everybody on this podcast you're gonna solve this world problem. So here it is. What advice do you have for disciples of Christ who think that way, realizing that in the Protestant church today, about 9 out of 10 believe that to be true? What's your thought about not being a professional evangelist and yet being able to talk about the reason for the hope that's within you. Give us some thoughts about how we approach people to change that dynamic.
And I would add, if you have a wingman of one or two, three guys, then you will encourage one another to build these relationships, depending on the context that you have, and encouraging one another to share. And you mentioned the guilt trip. It's not about guilt trip. It's about this is what we are called to do, but not in a guilt way, and we're not with these high expectations. Often in Western, in our churches, like you share a prayer request, and immediately people want to know next week, well, how did it go? Like, and I usually said, no, this is a long-term prayer. Like, I'm building a relationship with somebody. This might take 5 years, whatever. So I get it, the whole idea of the guilt trip that people can have, and that can kind of hold them back.
Darin, I'm really interested in trying to unpack the who you are for folks before we dive into the what we are as followers of Christ. So you're the executive director for the Center for Sports Analytics at Samford, along with being Margaret Gage Bush Professor for Marketing there at Samford. So sports analytics, kind of, I think I've heard you refer to this in some other talks about Moneyball. How about taking us on a walk and helping us understand what that's all about?
Yeah, so Moneyball, the movie, right? Billy Bean and all of that. If you're not familiar with it, data about 20, 25 years ago started really dominating how the game of baseball was being played. Incredible amount of data being used in terms of, where do we position the players to just, predicting what the pitcher was going to throw next. Should we steal, on this count or not? Everything you can imagine. So a lot of the decision making in baseball started being driven by data. And now that's spread across all sports. And so in 2017, my university, Samford University, which is in Birmingham, Alabama, we were the first school in the country to launch a Moneyball program, if you will. And it's been a lot of fun. So I have my job now is I basically am coaching up the next generation of Billy Beaners. I've got students on campus from about 130 students, and they come from all over. And some are wanting to do soccer, some are wanting to do football, some are wanting to do. I got hockey analytics students from Minnesota. I got you name it, and so it's a lot of fun.
And if I were to look at your billboard, basically, of logos, there's a lot of logos from a lot of organizations that are involved sending data your way, right?
Yeah, we made one of our goals when we first launched the program was we knew getting a job in sports is really, really difficult. Everybody wants to work in sports. And so if there's an entry level opening at an MLB team, for example, they're going to get thousands of resumes. So we wanted to be able to help our students ultimately land in jobs when they graduate. That was the goal. And so if that was going to happen, then we had to have those of us who were running the program had to have relationships ourselves. So from the very get-go, we worked really hard at building win-win relationships with sports organizations. And we've been very fortunate. We actually have that's something we gave to prayer. Before I ever even knew my first person that worked on the business side of sports, we prayed and really asked the Lord to we used the prayer of Jabez, expand my territory for your glory. That was sort of the theme. And God has just done that on and on and on and on and on in terms of how he's opened doors for us to be able to build relationships in the world of sports so that we can ultimately help our students, get those internships and jobs. And that's really what it's all about. So.
And this is a pretty unique animal among colleges. You kind of were leading edge on this, right?
Yeah, we were. Right after us, Syracuse University started a program. And it's been about 6 years that we've been doing this. And you're getting more and more schools are starting. In fact, I just saw yesterday the University of Florida is announcing they're putting in a 7-figure type money to be able to start a sports analytics program. So they're starting to pop up more and more because, in fact, if you look at the projected growth of sports analytics in the next decade, the number of jobs and it's just taken off. And so yeah, but it's really cool to be the first. That's really kind of neat that we were the first ones.
If I don't ask this question, I'm going to get roundly criticized by our folks who watch this. So tell me how you think over the next few years AI is going to get into your business.
It already is. I mean, so it's already big time into our business. In fact, I just got back about a month ago from the National Sports Forum, which is the largest sports industry, one of the largest sports industry professional events. And that was the main topic of the conference. Was we had speaker after speaker get up and talk about how AI was impacting every aspect, from, again, the team side, from making strategic decisions to who should we draft, to on and on it goes, to also to the business side when it comes to ticket pricing, when it comes to looking at social media data, just, again, on and on it goes. The creativity side, developing creative ways to engage our fans. AI is a great tool for coming up with for ideation, if you will. So it already is. It's already majorly impacting it, and so we've already incorporated it into our curriculum. I mean, we in fact, we just finished a project. We actually went over to England and we presented a marketing strategy project to a professional soccer team. And we used AI in the process of developing our solution that we presented to them. So we're already using it. So.
Well, Professor Darin White, if folks are interested in getting connected with what you're up to at Samford or out in the marketplace, where can we find some of your articles, and what websites would we go to find you?
Yeah, well, you can. I'm big on LinkedIn. I mean, that's what any business guy is going to be big on LinkedIn. So you can hunt me down that way. I'm also really big on Twitter, or now known as X. It's in the world of sports, it's we call it the virtual Buffalo Wild Wings of sports. It's where everybody loves to go and debate and talk and trash talk and all that when the game's going on. And so I'm got a big presence on Twitter. And so that would be, my title is Sports Biz Prof, Sports BIZ Biz Prof, with 2 little underscores in there, sports_biz_prof. And would love for anyone to follow me on that. And we're just all the time, all kind of fun things going on. In fact, I'll mention really quickly, we are coming up on one of the things that we get to be involved in at Samford, speaking of discipleship making, is I'm part of a group that does a conference every year called the Daniel Summit. And it's a gathering of people that work in the sports industry, that work on the business side of sports, if you will. And we get together every year, and we just kind of celebrate and talk about how can we use our influence in sports. Because if you work in sports, you're going to have a lot of cultural influence. How can we leverage that influence and be effective for the kingdom? And we're doing discipleship making within that context. And we do that every year. This year, we're going to be doing it at a church out in California. We got Louis Giglio coming out with his wife, which we're excited about. And it's all people that work on the business side of sports. And so if you follow me on social, you can read about that and many, many other things that we've got going on. So.
And your website, if we wanted to take a look at Samford itself, where do we go to find you there? Samford, of course, has got its own website, and you're out there as Professor Darin White.
Yeah, exactly. Go to samford.edu. And you can look at and then the program I run, the Center for Sports Analytics, we've got our own webpage, and my students are all the time cranking out new cool sports analytics articles. I had a student that just published one. He actually had an interview yesterday with ESPN about it, but he took a bunch of data and looked at ranking which NFL teams were doing the best job in terms of drafting talent over the last decade, and he had a really cool analytic model on that. And so if you're into that kind of stuff, I think you'd enjoy our website. So,
well, Professor Darin White, thank you for joining us today on the Disciple Dilemma.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Joe, grateful you'd co-host with me today. Blessings for all of you in Zagreb.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.